Hi, I'm Emma. 6 months ago, my sister Grace announced her engagement to Tyler Bennett, son of one of Connecticut's most influential political families. At their engagement party last weekend, I sat quietly in the back while everyone else gave heartfelt toasts about the golden couple. Nobody asked me to speak. Nobody even looked my way. That should have been the end of it, just another family gathering where I remained invisible. But then Senator James Mitchell, Tyler's family friend, stood up and said the words that changed everything. Before we wrap up, I'd love to hear from the governor herself. He was looking directly at me. The room went silent. Grace dropped her champagne flute. My mother's face went white, and I realized that everything I'd believed about my life for the past 18 months had been a lie. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What came next wasn't just family drama, it was the unraveling of a conspiracy that had stolen my entire future. Have you ever discovered that the people closest to you had been systematically destroying your dreams while convincing you that you weren't good enough to have any? The Brookside Country Club sits on a hill overlooking the Connecticut River, its colonial architecture and perfectly manicured grounds serving as the backdrop for Riverside's most important social events. The October air carried hints of wood smoke and dying leaves, and the golden light filtering through the oak trees gave everything that warm, nostalgic glow that makes you believe in happy endings. I should have felt celebratory. This was Grace's moment, after all, and she looked radiant in her cream-colored dress, her auburn hair swept into an elegant chignon that caught the light every time she laughed. I had arrived early, hoping to help with setup, but found that Lucas, my older brother, had already taken charge of the arrangements. He moved through the space with the confident ease of someone who belonged, adjusting floral arrangements and checking with the catering staff. At 32, Lucas possessed the kind of natural charisma that made people gravitate toward him. He worked in local politics, serving as an aide to the mayor, and everyone always said he was destined for bigger things. When he saw me hovering near the entrance, he barely glanced up from his clipboard. "Oh, Emma, good, you're here. The gift table needs to be moved to the other side of the room. Could you handle that?" His tone was brisk, dismissive, the way you'd speak to hired help rather than your sister. I nodded and began repositioning the elegantly wrapped packages, each one probably costing more than I made in a week at the small law firm where I worked as a junior associate. The guests began arriving around 5, a carefully curated collection of Riverside's social elite mixed with Tyler's political connections. Judge Patricia Caldwell, an old family friend, gave me a warm hug and asked how I was settling into my new job. I appreciated her kindness, though I noticed how she seemed to study my face with concern, as if she were trying to solve a puzzle. Tyler's parents swept in with an entourage that included several state legislators and business leaders, all of them carrying themselves with the particular brand of confidence that comes from never doubting your place in the world. Grace floated between groups like a natural hostess, her laughter bright and infectious. She had always possessed this gift for making everyone feel special, which explained why she'd been homecoming queen, class president, and now the center of attention at her own engagement party. Tyler stood beside her, solid and dependable, his political pedigree evident in the way he could seamlessly shift from discussing policy with the older men to charming the ladies with stories from his recent trip to Washington. I found myself gravitating toward the periphery of conversations, contributing when directly addressed but otherwise content to observe. This had become my natural position over the years, the quiet one who listened more than she spoke, who smiled politely and never caused waves. My parents, Robert and Linda Harrison, worked the room with practiced efficiency, my father's construction business having taught him how to build relationships along with buildings, while my mother's charity work had honed her ability to make everyone feel important. The dining room had been transformed into something magical, round tables draped in ivory linens, and crowned with arrangements of white roses and autumn foliage. Candles flickered in crystal holders, and the soft jazz ensemble Tyler had hired created an atmosphere of elegant sophistication. I was seated at table 6, sandwiched between Helen Parker, our longtime neighbor, and David Chen, a colleague from my law firm, who had been kind enough to serve as my date for the evening. David leaned over as we took our seats. "This is quite the production. Your sister really knows how to throw a party." I smiled and nodded, though I suspected Grace had received considerable help from our mother, and probably a professional event planner. The menu was exquisite, each course more elaborate than the last, and the wine flowed freely as conversations grew more animated throughout the evening. As dessert was being served, Tyler stood and tapped his knife against his wine glass. The room gradually quieted, all attention focusing on the head table where he stood with his arm around Grace's shoulders. He was handsome in that wholesome, all-American way that political families seem to specialize in producing, with sandy hair and the kind of smile that looked genuine in photographs. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Tyler began, his voice carrying easily across the room. "Grace and I are overwhelmed by your love and support as we start this new chapter together." He went on to thank various family members and friends, his words polished and heartfelt in the way that suggested he'd had practice giving speeches. Grace beamed beside him, occasionally dabbing at her eyes with her napkin. When Tyler finished, my father stood, raising his glass in a toast that praised Tyler for being worthy of his precious daughter, and welcomed him into the Harrison family. My mother followed with her own remarks about the importance of love and partnership, her voice thick with emotion as she spoke about watching Grace grow into the remarkable woman she had become. Lucas took the microphone next, and his speech was masterful, weaving together childhood memories of Grace with observations about Tyler's character and their bright future together. He had everyone laughing with stories about Grace's determination as a little girl, then growing misty-eyed as he talked about the privilege of watching love bloom between two people who clearly brought out the best in each other. Several of Tyler's friends and family members spoke, each offering wisdom, humor, or heartfelt congratulations. Judge Caldwell gave particularly moving remarks about the importance of building a marriage on mutual respect and shared values. Even Helen Parker was invited to say a few words about watching both Grace and Tyler grow up in the neighborhood. I remained in my seat, hands folded in my lap, watching the parade of speakers with a familiar sense of detachment. This was how these family events always unfolded, with me as a silent observer rather than an active participant. I told myself it didn't matter, that I preferred listening to speaking anyway, that not everyone.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Needed to be the center of attention, but as the evening wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling of being erased, of existing on the margins of my own family's story. The speeches were winding down when Senator James Mitchell rose from his seat at the head table. He was a distinguished man in his 50s, silver-haired and authoritative, with the kind of presence that commanded attention even before he spoke. I recognized him from newspaper photographs and television interviews, one of Connecticut's rising political stars with rumored national ambitions. "I hope you'll indulge me for just a moment longer," Senator Mitchell said, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of someone accustomed to public speaking. "Tyler, you know how proud I am of you, not just for finding such a wonderful partner, but for the integrity and vision you bring to everything you do. You're going to make a tremendous contribution to public service, and having Grace by your side will only strengthen that impact." He paused, scanning the room with the kind of theatrical timing that politicians master early in their careers. But I have to say, Tyler, you've outdone yourself by connecting with a family that truly understands the meaning of public service. When I learned that your future sister-in-law had achieved what she has at such a young age, well, I knew this was a family that shared our values. My stomach began to flutter with an odd sense of unease, though I couldn't pinpoint why. Senator Mitchell continued, his gaze moving across the room before settling on our table. The Harrison family has clearly instilled something special in their children. Lucas here is making his mark in local government, Grace is building her career in communications, and then there's Emma. The flutter in my stomach intensified. Several heads turned in my direction, and I felt heat rising in my cheeks. I glanced at my parents, who looked confused, then at Grace, whose expression had shifted from radiant joy to something approaching alarm. Senator Mitchell smiled broadly, his voice taking on an almost reverential tone. Emma, I have to tell you, your reputation precedes you in certain circles. When Dean Richardson at Sterling University Law School told me about your unprecedented academic performance, when Judge Williams mentioned your innovative policy proposals, when the State Bar Association highlighted your research on judicial reform, well, I knew we had a rising star on our hands. The room had gone completely silent now, the only sound the soft clink of someone setting down their wine glass. My heart was pounding so hard I was certain everyone could hear it. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. The senator's smile widened as he raised his glass. So before we conclude this celebration, I'd love to hear from the governor herself. Emma, would you honor us with a few words about this wonderful couple and perhaps share some insights about the future of public service in Connecticut? The silence that followed was deafening. I stared at Senator Mitchell, my mind struggling to process what he had just said. The governor? Sterling University Law School? Dean Richardson? None of these things made sense. I had graduated from Sterling, yes, but I'd barely scraped by, finishing in the middle of my class after struggling through courses that seemed designed to expose my intellectual limitations. I had never met Judge Williams, had never written policy proposals, had certainly never been highlighted by the State Bar Association for anything. Grace's champagne flute slipped from her fingers and shattered against the floor, the crystal fragments catching the candlelight like scattered diamonds. The sharp sound seemed to break whatever spell had held the room captive, and suddenly everyone was moving at once, heads turning toward me, whispers beginning to ripple through the crowd. My mother's face had gone ashen, her hand pressed against her chest as if she were having trouble breathing. My father looked bewildered, his eyes darting between me and Senator Mitchell as if trying to solve an impossible equation, but it was Lucas's expression that made my blood run cold. Where I expected to see confusion or surprise, I saw something else entirely. Fear, guilt. The look of someone whose carefully constructed world was beginning to crumble. I pushed back from the table, my chair scraping against the floor with an ugly screech that seemed to echo through the suddenly tense atmosphere. I think there's been some mistake, I managed to whisper, my voice barely audible even to myself. Senator Mitchell's confident smile faltered slightly. Mistake? Emma, surely you're being modest. Your work on constitutional law reform alone has been remarkable. The federal clerkship you turned down, the Supreme Court internship, the scholarship endowment in your name, these aren't exactly secrets in our community. Federal clerkship, Supreme Court internship, scholarship endowment. Each phrase hit me like a physical blow, and I felt the room spinning around me. David reached out to steady me, his hand warm on my elbow, but I barely registered his touch. Everything Senator Mitchell was describing sounded like someone else's life, someone else's accomplishments, someone else's future. Lucas stood abruptly, his chair toppling backward. Senator Mitchell, I think perhaps there's been some confusion. Emma has been working very hard, of course, but she's still finding her footing in her career. Maybe we could discuss this another time. His voice carried a forced lightness that didn't match the panic in his eyes. But Senator Mitchell wasn't deterred. Confusion. Lucas, I was at the Sterling University Law School awards ceremony 18 months ago when Emma received the highest honors in the school's history. I saw her deliver that keynote address about justice reform that had half the state Supreme Court on their feet. Are you telling me your family wasn't there? The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire nobody wanted to acknowledge. I looked around the table, seeing my life reflected back at me through the eyes of people who suddenly seemed like strangers. My parents looked stricken, Grace appeared to be on the verge of tears, and Lucas had gone completely pale. We weren't there, my mother said quietly, her words barely audible above the growing murmur of confused voices throughout the room. We didn't know about any ceremony. Senator Mitchell's expression shifted from confusion to something approaching alarm. You didn't know. But surely Emma told you about her achievements. The full academic scholarship, the law review editorship, the job offers from major firms in New York and Washington. These are the kind of accomplishments families celebrate. I felt something break open inside my chest, a crack that had been forming for months finally splitting wide. Every conversation about my struggles in law school, every concerned look when I talked about my grades, every gentle suggestion that maybe law wasn't for me, every reassurance that it was okay to be average, that not everyone could be exceptional, suddenly took on a different meaning. Lucas stepped forward, his political instincts kicking in as he tried to manage what was rapidly becoming a crisis. Senator, I think there may be some confusion about identities here. Perhaps you're thinking of another Emma, another Harrison. But Senator Mitchell was already shaking his head. No confusion, Lucas. I remember her quite clearly. Tall, dark hair, that distinctive scar on her left hand from what she mentioned was a childhood accident involving her brother's science project. He looked directly at me. You were wearing a blue dress that day, and you thanked your family in your speech for supporting your dreams even when you weren't sure you deserved them. The scar. He was talking about the thin white line across my knuckles from when Lucas's chemistry set had exploded when I was 12. There was no mistaking me for someone else. This was my life he was describing, my achievements, my accomplishments that had somehow been hidden from me and everyone I loved. The room erupted in whispers now, guests leaning toward each other to share their confusion and speculation. I caught fragments of conversation floating through the air. Did you know? How is this possible? Where has she been hiding this? The weight of their stares pressed down on me, and I felt exposed in a way that made my skin crawl. Grace finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Emma, is this true? Are you really, did you really do all those things? I opened my mouth to answer, but what could I say? That I had no memory of graduating with honors, of giving speeches, of turning down prestigious job offers, that my own life had apparently been hidden from me so completely that I felt like I was hearing about a stranger. The truth was too impossible to speak aloud. Judge Caldwell had risen from her seat and was making her way toward me, her face a mixture of concern and dawning understanding. Emma, dear, we need to talk. There are things you need to know. Her voice was gentle but carried an urgency that made my heart race even faster. Lucas intercepted her, his hand on her arm. Judge Caldwell, perhaps this isn't the appropriate time or place for this discussion. We should let Emma process this privately, as a family. But Judge Caldwell shook off his hand, her judicial authority asserting itself. Lucas, I think this conversation is long overdue. Emma, would you come with me? There are some matters we need to discuss immediately. I looked around the room one more time, taking in the faces of family and friends, who suddenly seemed like actors in a play I didn't remember auditioning for. Grace was crying now, mascara streaking down her cheeks, while Tyler tried unsuccessfully to comfort her. My parents sat frozen in their chairs, looking like they'd aged years in the span of minutes. And Lucas was watching me with an expression I'd never seen before, something desperate and calculating that made me understand, with perfect clarity, that he knew exactly what was happening. Yes, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. I think we need to talk. As Judge Caldwell led me toward a quiet corner of the room, I heard Senator Mitchell apologizing to the crowd, suggesting they continue celebrating while family matters were sorted out. The jazz ensemble struck up again, and conversations gradually resumed, but the magical atmosphere of the evening had been shattered as completely as Grace's champagne flute. I was about to learn that everything I thought I knew about my life had been carefully constructed lies, and that the truth was more devastating and more empowering than I could have imagined. But first I needed to understand how it was possible for someone to steal, not just opportunities or money, but an entire identity, an entire future, and convince the victim that they had never deserved any of it in the first place. The real story was just beginning. Judge Caldwell guided me through the French doors that led to the club's library, a quiet sanctuary lined with leather-bound volumes and heavy oak furniture that seemed to absorb sound. The muffled noise of the party continued beyond the closed doors, but here in this dim space illuminated only by table lamps with green glass shades, we might as well have been in another world entirely. She gestured for me to sit in one of the wingback chairs beside the fireplace, then settled herself across from me with the careful movements of someone who had spent decades considering her words before speaking them. Her silver hair was perfectly styled despite the evening's chaos, and her dark eyes held the kind of steady compassion I remembered from childhood visits to our home, when she and my parents would discuss community affairs over coffee and pound cake. Emma, before I say anything else, I want you to know that what happened tonight was not your fault. What's been done to you, what's been kept from you, none of it reflects on your character or your worth. She leaned forward slightly, her hands clasped in her lap. But I'm afraid the conversation we're about to have will be difficult. My throat felt dry, and when I tried to swallow, it came out as more of a gulp. Judge Caldwell, I don't understand what's happening. Senator Mitchell was talking about things I don't remember, achievements I never had. I graduated from Sterling Law School, yes, but I barely passed most of my classes. I spent 3 years struggling just to keep up. She studied my face for a long moment, and I saw something shift in her expression, a kind of sad recognition. Emma, what do you remember about your law school graduation? The ceremony, the celebrations afterward. The question seemed simple enough, but as I tried to access those memories, I found them strangely fuzzy around the edges. I remember being relieved it was over. Lucas drove me home afterward because I felt sick. Food poisoning, I think. My parents couldn't make it because Dad had a big construction project deadline, and Mom was dealing with some charity event crisis. Judge Caldwell nodded slowly. And your final grades, your class ranking? I shifted uncomfortably in the leather chair, which creaked softly under my movement. Middle of the pack. Lucas always said I should be proud of just finishing, that not everyone was cut out for academic excellence. He helped me understand that there were different kinds of success. Emma, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully. Judge Caldwell reached into her small evening purse and withdrew her phone. 18 months ago, I received a call from Dean Richardson at Sterling Law School. He wanted to know if I would be willing to speak at a special ceremony honoring their most outstanding graduate in over a decade. She swiped through her phone until she found what she was looking for, then turned the screen toward me. It was a photograph of a graduation ceremony, taken from the audience. On the stage, a young woman in cap and gown was accepting an award from an older man in academic regalia. The woman was unmistakably me, though I had no memory of the moment captured in the image. This is you, Emma, receiving the Sterling Medal for Academic Excellence, the highest honor the law school can bestow. You graduated valedictorian with a perfect grade point average. I stared at the photograph, my mind rejecting what my eyes were clearly seeing. The woman in the picture looked confident, radiant even, nothing like the anxious, struggling student I remembered being. That's not possible. I would remember something like that. Judge Caldwell swiped to another photo. This one showed me at a podium, gesturing as I spoke to an audience of people in formal attire. This is you delivering the keynote address at the Connecticut Bar Association's annual conference last spring. Your topic was reforming judicial selection in the digital age. It was brilliant, Emma. Groundbreaking work that's already being cited in academic journals. The room seemed to tilt slightly, and I gripped the arms of the chair to steady myself. I've never given a speech at a bar association conference. I've never even been to one. You have, Emma. Multiple times. You've also published 3 articles in law journals, served as editor-in-chief of the Sterling Law Review, and turned down job offers from some of the most prestigious firms in the country. She continued swiping through photographs, each one showing me in situations I couldn't remember, accepting awards I'd never heard of, shaking hands with people I'd never met. My voice came out as barely a whisper. How is this possible? How can I not remember my own life? Judge Caldwell set her phone down and leaned back in her chair. Emma, I believe someone has been systematically undermining your memory of your achievements. The psychological term is gaslighting. Though this goes far beyond typical emotional manipulation. This appears to be a coordinated effort to convince you that your successes never happened. The word gaslighting hit me like cold water. I had read about it in psychology textbooks, had seen it referenced in legal cases involving domestic abuse, but I had never imagined it could be so comprehensive, so thoroughly executed that someone could lose entire chunks of their own history. But who would do something like that? And why? Even as I asked the question, I felt the answer forming in the back of my mind, though I didn't want to acknowledge it. Emma, tell me about Lucas. Tell me about his role in your law school years. I closed my eyes, trying to sort through memories that suddenly felt contaminated, unreliable. He was incredibly supportive. When I was struggling with my studies, he would drive up to school to bring me care packages. He helped me organize my schedule, reminded me about deadlines, even proofread some of my papers. He said he wanted to make sure I didn't fail out. How often did he visit? Every few weeks, especially during my last year. He said he could see how overwhelmed I was, how the stress was affecting my health. He arranged for me to see a doctor about my anxiety, helped me get accommodations for extended time on exams. Judge Caldwell's expression grew increasingly grave. Emma, anxiety medication can affect memory formation, especially if someone is taking higher doses than prescribed. And extended time accommodations would require documentation of a learning disability or psychological condition. The implications of what she was suggesting began to crystallize, and I felt nauseous. Are you saying Lucas deliberately made me sick? That he convinced me I was failing when I wasn't? I'm saying that someone with access to your academic communications, someone who could intercept mail and phone calls, someone who could influence your medical care and academic accommodations, could potentially create a false reality around your college experience. She picked up her phone again. Emma, I'm going to show you one more thing. And then I think you need to see some documents. This photograph was different from the others. It showed me at what appeared to be a formal dinner, seated at a head table with several distinguished-looking individuals. I was wearing a blue dress I recognized, one I had always loved but rarely wore because Lucas had once commented that it made me look like I was trying too hard. This was taken at the Connecticut Women in Law Annual Awards dinner. You received the Rising Star Award for your work on criminal justice reform. Do you see the man sitting next to you? I squinted at the image. The man was perhaps 60, with gray hair and a kind face. He looked familiar, though I couldn't place him. That's Judge Williams of the state Supreme Court. You spent a summer working in his chambers as part of a special internship program. According to him, Your research on constitutional law was some of the finest work he'd seen from any attorney, let alone a law student. I stared at the photograph until my eyes began to water. The woman in the picture looked happy, accomplished like someone who belonged in that rarefied world of legal excellence. But I had no memory of feeling that way, of being that person. Judge Caldwell, if all of this is true, if I really did achieve these things, then where are the physical reminders? Where are the awards? The certificates? The job offer letters? Wouldn't I have kept something? She reached into her purse again and withdrew a business card which she handed to me. It was cream-colored with elegant black lettering. Victoria Walsh, attorney at law, Walsh & Associates, specializing in civil rights and employment law. Victoria is a friend of mine and one of the finest attorneys I know. She's been following your case, Emma. Though you don't know it yet, she has some things that belong to you. I turned the card over in my hands, running my thumb across the raised lettering. What kind of things? Letters that were supposed to reach you. Awards that were delivered to your family home. Official documents that should have been in your possession years ago. Judge Caldwell stood, smoothing her dress. Emma, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Over the past 18 months, have there been times when you felt like you were losing time? Days or weeks that seemed to pass in a blur? Periods where you felt disconnected from yourself? The question struck me with unexpected force. There had been times, especially during my final year of law school and the months immediately after graduation, when I felt like I was moving through fog. Days when I would wake up exhausted despite sleeping for hours, weeks when I couldn't concentrate on anything for more than a few minutes at a time. Yes, I said quietly. I thought it was just stress or depression from struggling academically. Emma, I think someone has been medicating you without your full knowledge or consent. I think someone has been intercepting your mail, monitoring your communications, and systematically undermining your confidence in your own abilities and memories. The library suddenly felt too small, too warm. I stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the club's gardens. In the distance, I could see the lights of the party continuing, could hear the faint sound of music and laughter. My family was out there, celebrating Grace and Tyler's future, while I was in here discovering that my entire past had been stolen from me. Why would Lucas do this? What could he possibly gain from destroying my life? Judge Caldwell joined me at the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. Lucas has political ambitions, Emma. He's been positioning himself for a run at state legislature, possibly Congress eventually. Having a sister who was becoming a prominent figure in legal and political circles could have been seen as either an asset or a threat. A threat. I'm his sister. Wouldn't my success reflect well on the family? Not if Lucas was concerned about being overshadowed. Not if he believed there was only room for one Harrison to rise to prominence in Connecticut politics. She turned to face me directly. Emma, your academic achievements weren't just impressive, they were historic. You were being discussed as a potential candidate for judicial appointment, possibly even gubernatorial material down the line. That's why Senator Mitchell referred to you as the governor. In political circles, you were seen as someone with unlimited potential. The weight of what she was telling me settled over me like a heavy blanket. My brother, the person I had trusted most, the person who had supposedly supported me through my most difficult times, had actually been sabotaging me in ways I couldn't even comprehend. What do I do now? How do I prove any of this? You start by reclaiming what's yours. Victoria Walsh has been building a case for months, documenting the evidence of fraud and psychological manipulation. But Emma, you need to understand that pursuing this will change everything. Your family relationships, your public profile, your entire life will be different once the truth comes out. I thought about Grace crying as her engagement party fell apart. I thought about my parents, who had looked so confused and hurt when Senator Mitchell revealed achievements they knew nothing about. I thought about all the times I had felt inadequate, all the opportunities I had probably declined because I didn't believe I deserved them. Judge Caldwell, do you really believe I'm capable of the things Senator Mitchell described? The speeches, the awards, the academic excellence? She smiled for the first time since we had entered the library. Emma, I've known you since you were a little girl. I've watched you grow up with a brilliant mind and a compassionate heart. What Senator Mitchell described tonight isn't surprising to me, it's what I always expected you would achieve once you had the chance. I looked back toward the party one more time, seeing my family and friends through the window like figures in a snow globe, beautiful and distant and somehow separate from the reality I was discovering. Tomorrow I would call Victoria Walsh, tomorrow I would begin the process of reclaiming my stolen life. But tonight I would return to that party and watch my sister celebrate her engagement, knowing that everything I thought I knew about myself and my family had been carefully constructed lies. The real investigation was about to begin. The morning after Grace's engagement party dawned gray and drizzly, the kind of October weather that makes you want to stay in bed with coffee and a book rather than face the complicated world outside. But sleep had been impossible after my conversation with Judge Caldwell, and I had spent the night pacing my small apartment, trying to reconcile the memories I thought I had with the photographic evidence she had shown me. My apartment near downtown Hartford was a modest one-bedroom space that I had chosen because it was all I could afford on my junior associate salary. The walls were painted a neutral beige that the landlord had selected, and my furniture consisted mostly of hand-me-downs and discount store purchases. Looking around the space now, I realized it reflected the diminished version of myself I had been living as, not the accomplished woman Senator Mitchell had described. I had tried calling Grace twice during the night, but both calls had gone to voicemail. I couldn't blame her. Her engagement party had ended in chaos, with guests departing in confused clusters, whispering among themselves about the bizarre scene they had witnessed. Tyler had looked shell-shocked as he helped Grace to their car, his political instincts clearly struggling to process a situation that couldn't be managed with practiced talking points. At 9 in the morning, I finally worked up the courage to call Victoria Walsh. Her secretary, a woman with a crisp, professional voice, informed me that Miss Walsh had been expecting my call and could see me that afternoon if I was available. The speed with which the appointment was arranged suggested that Judge Caldwell had already spoken with her, preparing the way for a conversation I wasn't sure I was ready to have. Walsh and Associates occupied the 7th floor of a modern glass building in downtown Hartford, the kind of sleek professional space that intimidated me even as I recognized it as the sort of environment where I should feel comfortable. The reception area was decorated in soothing blues and grays, with contemporary artwork that suggested both success and accessibility. Victoria Walsh herself appeared within minutes of my arrival, a woman in her 40s with short auburn hair and the kind of confident bearing that suggested she rarely lost cases she cared about winning. She wore a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than I made in a month, but her smile was warm and genuine as she extended her hand. "Emma, I'm so glad you decided to reach out. Judge Caldwell has told me a great deal about you, and I've been hoping we'd have a chance to meet." Her handshake was firm without being aggressive, and she led me back to her office with the easy efficiency of someone accustomed to putting nervous clients at ease. Her office was larger than my entire apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the Connecticut River. The walls were lined with law books and framed diplomas, including what I noticed was a degree from Harvard Law School. A large conference table occupied one corner of the room, its surface covered with organized stacks of documents and file folders. "Please, have a seat wherever you're comfortable," Victoria said, gesturing toward a seating area with 2 leather chairs and a small sofa arranged around a coffee table. I know this is overwhelming, so we'll go at whatever pace feels right for you. I chose one of the chairs, sinking into leather that was buttery soft and probably worth more than my monthly rent. Victoria settled across from me, pulling a legal pad from the coffee table and clicking open an expensive-looking pen. Emma, before we discuss the specifics of your situation, I want to establish some ground rules. Everything we discuss today is protected by attorney-client privilege, which means I cannot and will not share any of this information without your explicit consent. You are under no obligation to retain my services or take any legal action based on what we discover. My job today is simply to help you understand what has happened and what your options are moving forward. I nodded, though my throat felt too tight to speak. Victoria continued, her voice gentle but businesslike. Judge Caldwell has given me some background on your situation, but I'd like to hear from you directly. Can you tell me about your experience in law school? What you remember about your academic performance, your relationships with faculty, your plans for after graduation? I spent the next 20 minutes recounting the version of law school I remembered, struggling with coursework that seemed beyond my abilities. Feeling constantly anxious about falling behind, relying on Lucas for emotional support and practical help with everything from scheduling to meal planning. Victoria listened without interruption, taking occasional notes but mostly maintaining eye contact that suggested she was hearing information that didn't surprise her. When I finished, she set down her pen and folded her hands in her lap. Emma, what I'm about to show you is going to be difficult to process. I want you to know that you can stop this conversation at any time, and you can take breaks whenever you need them. She stood and walked to her desk, returning with a thick manila folder that she set on the coffee table between us. The tab was labeled E. Harrison Academic Records and Correspondence. This folder contains documents that should have been in your possession for years. Letters from law schools, job offers, academic awards, scholarship notifications. All of them were sent to your family home address and never forwarded to you. Victoria opened the folder and withdrew the first document, a letter on Sterling University Law School letterhead dated 3 years earlier. She handed it to me, and I read the opening lines with growing astonishment. Dear Miss Harrison, it is my pleasure to inform you that you have been selected as the recipient of the Dean's Merit Scholarship, a full academic scholarship awarded annually to our most promising incoming student. I looked up at Victoria, my hands shaking slightly as I held the letter. I never received this. I took out student loans, worked part-time jobs to pay for school. I graduated with over $100,000 in debt. Keep reading, Victoria said gently. I continued through the letter, which outlined not just the scholarship but additional benefits, including a guaranteed summer internship with a prestigious law firm and mentorship from distinguished faculty members. At the bottom of the letter was a handwritten note from Dean Richardson, expressing his excitement about working with me and asking me to call him directly to discuss my course of study. Emma, this scholarship was awarded based on your undergraduate academic record and your performance on the LSAT. You scored in the 99th percentile. I stared at her. That's not possible. I remember taking the LSAT multiple times, never scoring higher than the 70th percentile. Lucas helped me study. He said I was improving but that I shouldn't get my hopes up about elite schools. Victoria reached into the folder again, this time withdrawing an official score report from the Educational Testing Service. My name was clearly printed at the top, along with a score that was indeed in the 99th percentile. This is your actual LSAT score, Emma. The report was sent to your family home. Based on this score and your undergraduate performance, you were recruited by multiple top-tier law schools. She continued pulling documents from the folder, letters from Harvard, Yale and Columbia expressing interest in my candidacy, a handwritten note from a professor at Georgetown, describing my undergraduate thesis as groundbreaking work that deserves publication, A scholarship offer from New York University that would have covered not just tuition but living expenses as well. With each document, I felt like I was meeting a stranger who happened to share my name. This other Emma was brilliant, sought after, destined for great things. The Emma I knew was average at best, lucky to have graduated law school at all. Victoria, I don't understand how this is possible. How could all of this exist without me knowing about it? Emma, someone with access to your mail and your personal information has been intercepting these communications for years. Someone who could present himself as acting on your behalf, declining opportunities and making decisions about your future without your knowledge. The implication was clear, though I still couldn't bring myself to say Lucas's name out loud. Victoria seemed to understand my reluctance. "Let me show you something else," she said, reaching for another section of the folder. "These are medical records that I obtained through a private investigator. They show a pattern of prescriptions filled in your name for anxiety medications and sleep aids, most of them picked up by someone other than yourself." She handed me a stack of pharmacy records that showed regular prescriptions being filled over a 2-year period. The medications listed were powerful anti-anxiety drugs and sleeping pills, substances that could cause memory problems and cognitive impairment, if used improperly. "Emma, do you remember taking these medications?" I studied the records, recognizing some of the drug names from bottles I had found in my medicine cabinet during law school. Lucas said they were vitamins and supplements to help with stress. He said the doctor had recommended them, and that he would pick them up for me to save me time. "These aren't vitamins, Emma. These are controlled substances that require careful monitoring. In the doses indicated here, they would cause significant memory impairment, and make it difficult for you to form new memories or access existing ones clearly." The room seemed to spin slightly, and I gripped the arms of my chair. The medication explained the fog I had lived in for years, the sense of disconnection from my own life, the inability to trust my own memories and perceptions. "There's more," Victoria continued, though her voice was gentler now. "These documents show that someone has been accessing your academic and medical records through fraudulent means, using forged authorizations and identity theft. The same person has been corresponding with law schools, employers and professional organizations on your behalf, declining opportunities and turning down offers that could have changed your life." She showed me copies of emails sent from an account that used my name but an address I didn't recognize. The messages were professionally written but contained subtle signs that they hadn't been composed by me. Phrases I wouldn't use, references to family situations that weren't quite accurate, a general tone that was more formal than my natural writing style. "Emma, someone has been living a version of your life in parallel, making decisions about your career, your education and your future while keeping you in a medicated fog that prevented you from realizing what was happening." I set the documents down on the coffee table and leaned back in the chair, feeling like I might be sick. The scope of the deception was breathtaking, requiring not just access to my personal information but sophisticated knowledge of how academic and professional systems worked. "Why?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew the answer. "Why would someone go to such elaborate lengths to destroy my future?" Victoria sat forward slightly, her expression serious. "Emma, based on your actual academic record and the opportunities you were offered, you were on track to become one of the most influential legal minds of your generation. Law schools were competing to recruit you. Major firms were offering starting salaries in the high 6 figures, and you had already caught the attention of federal judges who were interested in offering you clerkships." She paused, allowing the magnitude of what I had lost to sink in. "Someone saw your potential as a threat to their own ambitions. Someone who wanted to ensure that there would be only one member of the Harrison family rising to prominence in legal and political circles." I closed my eyes, finally allowing myself to confront the truth I had been avoiding. Lucas had stolen my life, systematically and deliberately, using my trust in him and my love for family against me. He had drugged me, isolated me, and convinced me that my failure was my own fault, while simultaneously living off the reputation and opportunities that should have been mine. What can we do about it? I asked quietly. Victoria smiled for the first time since I had arrived. Emma, we can get your life back. It won't be easy, and it won't be quick, but we can expose what was done to you and ensure that you receive the opportunities and recognition you earned. The question is whether you're ready to fight for it. I looked out the window at the Hartford skyline, thinking about all the years I had spent believing I wasn't good enough, smart enough, accomplished enough to deserve success. I thought about the student loans I was still paying for an education that should have been free, the small apartment and modest salary that reflected the diminished life I had been convinced was all I deserved. And I thought about Grace's engagement party, about the moment when Senator Mitchell had called me the governor and revealed a version of myself I had never been allowed to know. I'm ready, I said. The real battle for my identity was about to begin. Victoria walked me to the elevator. When our meeting concluded, her hand briefly touching my shoulder in a gesture that was both professional and maternal. Emma, I want you to go home and think about everything we've discussed. Don't make any decisions about how to proceed until you've had time to process what you've learned. And Emma, please be careful who you talk to about this until we decide on our next steps. The ride down to the lobby felt interminable, the elevator's smooth descent somehow emphasizing the feeling that my entire world was in free fall. When the doors opened onto the marble-floored lobby, I stepped out into what felt like a completely different universe than the one I had inhabited that morning. The same Hartford street stretched before me, with the same shops and restaurants and pedestrians hurrying about their daily business, but I was no longer the same person who had walked into Victoria's building 2 hours earlier. My car was parked in a garage 3 blocks away, and I walked slowly through the downtown streets, trying to reconcile the physical landscape around me with the mental landscape that had been so dramatically altered. The October air was crisp, carrying the scent of dying leaves and the promise of winter, and I found myself noticing details I had never paid attention to before. The way the afternoon light caught the windows of the old state house, the confident stride of business people emerging from important meetings, the sense of purpose that seemed to radiate from everyone except me. When I reached my apartment, I climbed the 2 flights of stairs to my door feeling like I was ascending to a museum exhibit of my former life. Everything in the small space suddenly seemed like evidence of the diminished existence I had been convinced to accept. The second-hand furniture, the bare walls, the overflowing stack of bills on my kitchen counter, all of it reflecting a version of myself that had been systematically programmed to expect less than she deserved. I made a cup of tea and sat at my small dining table, spreading out the copies of documents Victoria had given me to take home. Looking at them in my own space made them seem even more surreal. Here was a letter from the Supreme Court of Connecticut, inviting me to apply for a prestigious clerkship. Here was a scholarship notification that would have eliminated my student debt entirely. Here was a job offer from a Manhattan firm starting at a salary 3 times what I currently made. Each document represented a door that had been opened for me, then quietly closed by someone I trusted completely. The methodical nature of the deception was what struck me most. This wasn't a crime of passion or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a sustained campaign of psychological warfare waged by my own brother against my future. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I looked down to see Lucas's name on the screen. Hey heard the engagement party got a little crazy last night. Hope you're doing okay. Want to grab dinner and talk? I'm worried about you. I stared at the message for a long time, reading concern and manipulation into every word. The casual tone, the diminutive nickname that suddenly felt patronizing, the suggestion that I needed taking care of rather than truth-telling. For the first time in my adult life, I could see through the loving brother facade to the calculating mind beneath. I didn't respond to the text. Instead, I called David Chen, the colleague who had accompanied me to the party, and who had witnessed the entire bizarre scene. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm with concern. Emma, I've been thinking about you all day. That was intense last night. How are you holding up? David was one of the few people in my current life who had never known me as anything other than the competent if unremarkable associate I appeared to be. He had no investment in maintaining any particular version of my identity, which made him feel like a safe person to talk to. David, can I ask you something? And I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course, what's on your mind? I took a deep breath. In the time you've known me, have I ever seemed like someone who was hiding something, like there was more to my background than what I was sharing? There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could almost hear him thinking, "That's an interesting question, Emma. You know, there have been times when I've wondered about that. You have this way of analyzing complex legal issues that seems almost intuitive, like you've had training or experience beyond what shows up on your resume. And sometimes when we're discussing cases, you'll reference concepts or precedents that I wouldn't expect someone with your background to know." His words hit me like a physical blow. Even in my diminished state, traces of my real education and abilities had been leaking through the pharmaceutical fog Lucas had kept me in. "Why do you ask? Does this have something to do with what happened at the party?" I found myself telling David about my meeting with Victoria Walsh, about the documents that proved I had been living a false version of my own life. He listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions that showed he was taking my account seriously rather than dismissing it as impossible. When I finished, David was quiet for a long moment. "Emma, this explains so much. I've always felt like you were underemployed at our firm, like you were capable of handling much more complex work than what you were being given. But I assumed you were being cautious about advancing too quickly or that you had personal reasons for keeping a lower profile. You believed it. You don't think I'm having some kind of breakdown or delusion. Emma, I've seen you work. I've watched you analyze cases and identify issues that partners with decades of experience miss. What you're describing doesn't sound impossible to me. It sounds like an explanation for things I've been noticing but couldn't understand." David's validation felt like the first solid ground I had stood on since Senator Mitchell had uttered those fateful words at the engagement party. If someone who knew me in my current state could see traces of the abilities I had supposedly lost, then perhaps recovering them wasn't as impossible as it seemed. "David, I need to ask you for another favor. I'm going to be doing some investigation into my past, trying to piece together what really happened during law school. If Lucas contacts you asking about our conversation or trying to find out what I'm up to, can you Absolutely. And Emma, if you need help with research or anything else, I'm here. What Lucas did to you, if it's true, it's not just wrong, it's criminal. You shouldn't have to face this alone." After we hung up, I felt slightly less isolated but also more aware of the magnitude of what I was facing. Proving that Lucas had systematically undermined my life would require more than just the documents Victoria had shown me. It would require establishing a pattern of deception that spanned years and involved multiple institutions and individuals. I spent the evening researching memory manipulation and pharmaceutical gaslighting, learning about cases where individuals had been convinced they were mentally ill or cognitively impaired through the deliberate misuse of prescription medications. The literature was sparse but disturbing, describing scenarios where victims lost years of their lives to medically induced confusion while their abusers gained control over their finances, relationships, and opportunities. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to Sterling University Law School. The campus looked exactly as I remembered it, though walking through the familiar quad felt like visiting a place from someone else's dream. Students hurried between classes with the focused energy I remembered, carrying heavy backpacks and discussing cases with the intense seriousness that law school cultivates. The dean's office was located in the main administration building, a red brick structure that had been built in the 1920s and still retained an atmosphere of academic gravitas. I hadn't made an appointment, but I hoped that the unusual circumstances of my situation would persuade Dean Richardson to see me without advance notice. The secretary, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical bun, looked up when I entered. "Good morning. How can I help you?"
My name is Emma Harrison. I graduated 18 months ago and I was hoping to speak with Dean Richardson about some discrepancies in my academic records. She consulted her computer screen, typing my name with the efficient speed of someone who had been doing the same job for decades. Emma Harrison, she repeated, her tone shifting to one of recognition. Of course, our valedictorian. Dean Richardson speaks about you quite often. Let me see if he has a few minutes. Valedictorian. The word hit me like a physical shock. Even after everything Victoria had shown me, hearing it spoken so casually by someone who had no reason to lie was almost overwhelming. The secretary returned within minutes, beaming. Dean Richardson is delighted that you're here. He can see you right now. Dean Richardson's office was exactly what you would expect from someone who had dedicated his life to legal education, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, diplomas and awards covering every available wall space, and a massive oak desk that had probably witnessed thousands of important conversations. The dean himself was a tall, distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and the kind of professorial bearing that commanded respect without demanding it. "Emma," he said, rising from his desk and extending his hand with genuine warmth. "What a wonderful surprise. I was just thinking
about you yesterday when I was reviewing applications for next year's Supreme Court clerkship program. How are you enjoying your position with Justice Williams?" Justice Williams. The same name Judge Caldwell had mentioned, the man I supposedly worked for but had no memory of meeting. I felt my carefully planned explanation dissolving into confusion. "Dean Richardson, I'm afraid there's been some misunderstanding. I'm not working with Justice Williams. I'm employed at a small firm here in Hartford doing general practice work." His expression shifted from pleasure to puzzlement. "I'm sorry, I don't understand. Justice Williams specifically requested that we hold your clerkship position while you completed your commitment to him. We've been turning away other qualified candidates based on his assurance that you would be returning to us." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "I've never worked for Justice Williams. I don't even know who he is." Dean Richardson sat down heavily, his face grave with concern. "Emma, Justice Williams has been mentoring you for over a year. He calls me regularly to discuss your progress and to coordinate your transition back to academic work. Just last month, he told me you were considering pursuing a graduate degree in constitutional law." I sank into the chair across from his desk, feeling like Alice tumbling down the rabbit hole into an increasingly bizarre alternate reality. "Dean Richardson, I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to help me understand what's been happening. I think someone has been impersonating me or speaking on my behalf without my knowledge." The conversation that followed was one of the most disorienting of my life. Dean Richardson showed me academic records that documented achievements I couldn't remember, correspondence about opportunities I had never heard of, and evaluations of work I had supposedly completed but could not recall producing. According to his files, I had not only graduated valedictorian but had also published groundbreaking research, received multiple academic awards, and been recruited by several federal judges for clerkship positions. "Emma, I have to ask, are you experiencing some kind of memory loss?" The woman I'm describing, the student who walked across that stage 18 months ago and delivered one of the most inspiring commencement addresses in our school's history, that was definitely you. I pulled out my phone and showed him the photographs Judge Caldwell had shared. Images of me at events I couldn't remember attending, accepting awards I had no recollection of. "Aaron, these pictures exist, but I have no memory of any of these moments. I believe someone has been medicating me to suppress my memories while simultaneously managing my professional life without my knowledge." Dean Richardson studied the photographs, his expression growing increasingly troubled. "Emma, this is extremely serious. If what you're suggesting is true, then someone has been committing fraud not just against you but against our institution and the legal profession more broadly." He reached for his phone. "I think we need to involve campus security and possibly law enforcement, but first, I want to show you something that might help you understand the scope of what's been happening." Dean Richardson led me to a conference room down the hall, where he unlocked a cabinet and withdrew a large portfolio bound in the school's official colors. "This is your academic portfolio, Emma. Every law student compiles one, but yours was exceptional enough that we kept a complete copy for our archives." He opened the portfolio to reveal copies of papers I had supposedly written, each one marked with grades that indicated excellence beyond anything I remembered achieving. The writing was unmistakably mine. I recognized my style, my approach to legal analysis, even my habit of using specific turns of phrase. But I had no memory of researching these topics, crafting these arguments, or receiving the glowing feedback that accompanied each assignment. "Emma, this is your work. Not just the handwriting, but the legal reasoning, the analytical approach, the depth of research. This represents hundreds of hours of effort and a level of intellectual sophistication that can't be faked." I turned page after page, seeing evidence of an academic career that felt like it had belonged to someone else. Papers on constitutional law that demonstrated complex understanding of legal precedent, research projects that had apparently influenced actual policy discussions, a senior thesis that Dean Richardson said had been cited in several federal court decisions. The person who wrote these papers was brilliant, dedicated, and destined for significant contributions to the legal profession, Dean Richardson said quietly. "If someone has been suppressing your memory of creating this work, they haven't just stolen your past, they've attempted to steal your entire intellectual identity." By the time I left Sterling University Law School that afternoon, I had photocopies of my entire academic file, contact information for professors who had worked with me, and Dean Richardson's promise to begin an investigation into how someone had been able to intercept and respond to official communications on my behalf. I also had something even more valuable, proof that the person I thought I was had been systematically constructed to hide the person I actually was. The drive back to Hartford felt like traveling between two different versions of reality. In one version, I was Emma Harrison, struggling junior associate who had barely managed to graduate law school and was lucky to have any job at all. In the other version, I was Emma Harrison, academic superstar who had been recruited by federal judges and was being discussed as potential gubernatorial material. Both versions were true, which meant that neither version was complete. The real Emma Harrison was somewhere between them, a woman whose natural abilities had been both demonstrated and suppressed, whose potential had been recognized by others but hidden from herself. When I reached my apartment, I found Lucas sitting on the front steps, his expression one of concerned brotherly worry that now looked like a carefully constructed performance. He stood when he saw me, his movements casual but his eyes sharp with attention to my reaction. "Emma, there you are. I've been worried sick. You haven't been answering my calls or texts, and after what happened at the party, I wanted to make sure you were okay." I looked at him carefully, studying the face I had trusted my entire life but was now seeing clearly for the first time. The concerned furrow of his brow, the slightly tilted head that suggested active listening, the way he positioned himself between me and my front door, as if protecting me from threats only he could see. "I'm fine, Lucas, just processing everything that happened. Emma, I think we need to talk about Senator Mitchell's comments. I'm concerned that someone has been feeding him false information about your academic background, maybe trying to embarrass our family or cause problems for Tyler's political connections." The lies came so smoothly, delivered with such apparent sincerity, that I could understand how I had believed them for so long. Lucas had always been good at making me feel like he was protecting me from a world that was too complicated or demanding for someone with my limitations. "What kind of false information?" I asked, fishing my keys from my purse while maintaining eye contact. "Well, obviously you didn't graduate valedictorian or receive any major awards. Someone has confused you with another student, or there's been some kind of clerical error that's gotten blown out of proportion." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to the confidential tone he used when sharing important information. "I think we should contact Sterling's administration office and get this cleared up before it causes more problems." I unlocked my front door, very aware that Lucas expected to be invited inside for the kind of long, supportive conversation we had shared so many times over the years. That's a good idea, Lucas. I'll look into it. Actually, Emma, why don't I handle this for you? I know how stressful this kind of thing can be, and I have some experience dealing with bureaucratic mix-ups. I could call the school tomorrow and get it sorted out quietly. The offer was exactly what I would have expected from the loving, protective brother I had always believed Lucas to be. It was also exactly what I would expect from someone who needed to maintain control over information that could expose years of carefully orchestrated deception. That's sweet of you to offer, but I think I should handle this myself. It is my academic record, after all. For just a moment, something flickered across Lucas's expression, too quickly for me to identify but noticeable enough to confirm my suspicions. He recovered immediately, his smile returning to its normal warmth. Of course you're right, I just hate seeing you deal with unnecessary stress. He paused, studying my face. Emma, you seem different somehow. More tense than usual. Are you sure you're feeling okay? Sometimes anxiety can make small problems feel much bigger than they really are. The suggestion that my concerns were symptoms of anxiety rather than responses to actual problems was so familiar that I almost accepted it automatically. For years, Lucas had been the voice in my head telling me that my perceptions were unreliable, that my worries were disproportionate, that my struggles were evidence of my own inadequacy rather than external manipulation. I'm feeling very clear, actually, clearer than I have in a long time. Lucas nodded, but I could see him processing my response, calculating his next move in a conversation that had not gone according to his expectations. Well, that's good to hear. Listen, why don't we plan to have dinner this weekend, just the two of us, like old times? I feel like we haven't had a chance to really talk in a while. I'll let you know, I have some things I need to take care of first. I stepped inside my apartment and closed the door, leaving Lucas standing on the front steps with his concerned expression and his careful questions. Through the peephole, I watched him stand there for several minutes, probably debating whether to knock again or try a different approach. Finally, he walked away, but not before I saw him pull out his phone and make a call. Even from inside my apartment, I could see the tension in his posture, the rapid gestures that suggested he was having an urgent conversation with someone about a situation that was not going according to plan. I spent the rest of the evening reviewing the documents Victoria had given me and the academic records Dean Richardson had copied for me, trying to construct a timeline of when and how my memories had been compromised. The evidence painted a picture of systematic manipulation that had begun during my final year of law school and intensified after graduation, coinciding exactly with Lucas's increased involvement in my daily life and medical care. Tomorrow I would begin the process of reclaiming my stolen identity, but tonight, for the first time in years, I went to sleep without taking any medication, determined to experience whatever dreams or memories might surface when my mind was finally free to remember who I really was. The next morning dawned clear and cold, with the kind of sharp October sunlight that makes everything seem more vivid and defined. I woke feeling more alert than I had in months, my mind sharp in a way that felt both familiar and foreign. For the first time since I could remember, I had slept deeply without pharmaceutical assistance, and my dreams had been unusually vivid, filled with fragments of memories that felt like pieces of a puzzle I was finally ready to assemble. I called in sick to work again, knowing that my investigation was going to require more time than I could manage around my regular responsibilities. Then I drove to the Hartford Public Library, a massive stone building downtown that had always felt like a sanctuary to me during my college years. I needed a quiet space to organize my thoughts and plan my next steps, somewhere that Lucas was unlikely to find me if he decided to check on my activities. The reference section was nearly empty at 10 in the morning, most of the serious researchers not arriving until afternoon. I claimed a large table near the windows and spread out the documents I had accumulated over the past few days, organizing them chronologically to create a timeline of my stolen life. The pattern that emerged was both methodical and chilling. Beginning in my third year of law school, there was clear evidence of intercepted communications, declined opportunities, and medical interventions that coincided with periods of memory loss. Someone had been playing a long game, carefully orchestrating my decline, while simultaneously managing my public reputation in ways that benefited their own agenda. My phone buzzed with a text from Victoria Walsh. "Emma, can you come in this afternoon? I have some additional information that I think you'll want to see." I responded immediately, confirming that I would be there at 2 o'clock. The hours between morning and afternoon crawled by as I continued piecing together the evidence of my systematic exploitation. By the time I arrived at Victoria's office, I had filled several pages with notes and questions, creating what looked like a prosecution strategy against my own brother. Victoria greeted me with the same professional warmth as before, but I could see excitement in her eyes that suggested she had discovered something significant. She led me to the conference room where we had first met, but this time the table was covered with new documents and what appeared to be surveillance photographs. "Emma, I've been busy since our last meeting. I hired a private investigator to look into Lucas's activities over the past few years, and what we found is going to shock you." She gestured for me to sit, then opened a thick folder that hadn't been there during my previous visit. "Lucas hasn't just been stealing your academic opportunities. He's been actively impersonating you in professional settings, using your credentials and reputation to advance his own political career." Victoria pulled out a series of photographs that showed Lucas at various formal events, shaking hands with prominent figures in Connecticut politics and law. In several of the images, he was holding what appeared to be awards or certificates. These photographs were taken at political fundraisers and legal conferences over the past 18 months. "Lucas has been representing himself as your spokesperson and representative, accepting honors on your behalf, and building professional relationships using your academic achievements as his credentials." She showed me programs from conferences where Lucas was listed as presenting papers I had supposedly written, business cards where he described himself as representing the Harrison legal team, and social media posts where he tagged influential people while discussing policy positions that aligned with research I had apparently conducted. "Emma, your brother has built his entire political network by trading on your intellectual accomplishments. The people who are supporting his candidacy for state legislature believe they're backing someone with deep legal expertise and academic credentials that are actually yours." The scope of the deception was breathtaking. Lucas hadn't just stolen my past, he had been living off it, using my achievements as currency in political circles where academic credibility was highly valued. "There's more," Victoria continued, pulling out financial documents. "Lucas has been receiving consulting fees and speaking honoraria for presentations about legal topics, payments that were supposed to go to you for work you actually performed. We're talking about substantial amounts of money over an extended period." The financial records showed dozens of payments to Lucas from law firms, political organizations, and academic institutions, all of them for work that bore my name but had been delivered by him. The total amount was staggering, representing what should have been a significant supplement to my actual income. "Victoria, this is insane. How is any of this legal? How could institutions just accept Lucas as my representative without verifying his authority?" "That's where it gets really interesting," Victoria said, pulling out a set of legal documents. "Lucas has been using forged power of attorney agreements that supposedly give him the right to conduct business on your behalf. These documents claim that you granted him broad authority to manage your professional affairs due to health issues that prevent you from handling them yourself." She showed me copies of documents bearing my signature, though the handwriting looked slightly different from my natural style. The papers described me as suffering from anxiety and depression severe enough to require ongoing medical supervision and professional management. "Emma, these documents create a legal fiction where you're portrayed as mentally incompetent to manage your own affairs. They've been used to justify everything from declining job opportunities to redirecting payments to accepting awards in your name." I stared at the forged papers, seeing my life reduced to a series of false medical diagnoses that painted me as incapable of independent thought or action. The documents were sophisticated enough to pass casual inspection, but detailed enough to give Lucas broad authority over every aspect of my professional existence. "How do we prove they're forgeries?" "We've already started that process," Victoria said with satisfaction. "I had a handwriting expert examine these signatures compared to authentic samples from your law school records.
The differences are subtle but definitive. These documents are fraudulent, which means everything Lucas has done using them constitutes identity theft on a massive scale. Victoria walked to her desk and returned with another folder, this one marked criminal referral. Emma, what's been done to you isn't just a civil matter. Your brother has committed multiple felonies, including identity theft, fraud, forgery, and what could be classified as unlawful imprisonment through pharmaceutical manipulation. I've been working with prosecutors in the state attorney's office, and they're very interested in pursuing criminal charges. The idea of Lucas facing criminal prosecution felt both satisfying and terrifying. While part of me wanted him to face consequences for what he had done, another part of me shrank from the idea of destroying what remained of my family relationships. What would happen if we pursue criminal charges? Lucas would likely face significant prison time if convicted. His political career would be over and he would be required to make full financial restitution for the money he's stolen from you. But Emma, I have to be honest with you, the legal process would be long, public, and emotionally difficult. Victoria sat down across from me, her expression serious. There's something else you need to know. We believe Lucas had help with this scheme. The level of coordination required, the access to medical records and prescription medications, the sophisticated forgery of legal documents, this wasn't a one-person operation. She pulled out surveillance photographs that showed Lucas meeting with a woman I didn't recognize, an older man in a doctor's coat, and what appeared to be a legal professional based on the law office visible in the background. We think Lucas has been working with a network of people who helped him maintain control over your life and reputation. A doctor who provided the medications, a lawyer who helped with the forged documents, possibly others who helped coordinate the deception. The idea that my destruction had been a collaborative effort involving multiple professionals was almost too much to process. This wasn't just family dysfunction or sibling rivalry, this was an organized conspiracy to steal my identity and use it for others' benefit. Emma, I need to ask you a difficult question. Are you prepared to see this through to the end, regardless of the consequences for Lucas and anyone else involved? I looked around Victoria's conference room, with its expensive furniture and city views, thinking about the small apartment and modest job I had been convinced represented the best I could achieve. I thought about the student loans I was still paying for, an education that should have been free, the opportunities I had supposedly declined, the years of my life I had lost to pharmaceutical fog and false limitations. Victoria, for the past 18 months I've been living as a shadow of myself because I believed that was all I deserved. I've been paying for crimes against my own future while the people who committed them built their lives on my stolen achievements. I stood up feeling stronger and more determined than I had since Senator Mitchell had uttered those fateful words at Grace's engagement party. Yes, I'm prepared to see this through. I want my life back, and I want everyone who helped steal it to face the consequences. Victoria smiled, the first genuinely pleased expression I had seen from her. Then let's get started. We have a lot of work to do. The Hartford County Courthouse stood like a monument to justice on a hill overlooking the Connecticut River, its neoclassical columns and granite facade conveying the weight of legal authority that had drawn me to law in the first place. Walking up those steps 3 weeks after my meeting with Victoria felt like ascending toward a reckoning that had been years in the making. The morning air carried the crisp bite of November, and the maple trees lining the courthouse grounds had turned brilliant shades of gold and crimson that seemed to mock the gravity of what was about to unfold. Victoria walked beside me, her heels clicking against the stone steps with the confident rhythm of someone who had climbed these stairs hundreds of times before. She carried a leather briefcase that contained 3 years' worth of evidence documenting the systematic theft of my identity, my achievements, and my future. Behind us, David Chen and Judge Caldwell followed at a respectful distance, their presence serving as both moral support and witness to whatever would happen inside. The courthouse lobby was bustling with the usual morning activity, attorneys consulting with clients in hushed tones, court officers checking schedules, and the occasional family group huddled together in the kind of strained conversation that suggested their lives were about to change dramatically. I recognized several faces from Connecticut's legal community, colleagues and competitors who would undoubtedly be watching today's proceedings with professional interest and personal curiosity. We took the elevator to the 5th floor, where courtroom 5B had been reserved for what the official docket listed simply as People of Connecticut v. Lucas Harrison et al. The designation was deliberately vague, but everyone who mattered in Connecticut legal circles knew that today's hearing would determine whether my brother and his co-conspirators would face criminal charges for what prosecutors were calling one of the most sophisticated identity theft schemes in state history. Lucas was already seated at the defendant's table when we entered the courtroom, flanked by two attorneys who looked like they charged rates that would make most people's eyes water. He wore a navy suit that I recognized from family photos, the same one he had worn to our cousin's wedding and his swearing-in ceremony as the mayor's aide. His expression was carefully neutral, but I could see tension in the way he held his shoulders, the slight tremor in his hands as he shuffled through papers that probably contained strategies for destroying my credibility and protecting his own reputation. Seated beside Lucas were two other defendants who had been charged as co-conspirators. Margaret Hoffman, a psychiatrist who had been prescribing the medications that kept me in a cognitive fog for over 2 years, sat rigidly upright with the kind of defiant posture that suggested she believed her professional credentials would shield her from meaningful consequences. Next to her was Bradley Morrison, an attorney who had helped Lucas forge the power of attorney documents and had accepted payment for legal services that were supposedly rendered to me but actually benefited my brother's political career. The gallery behind the defendant's table was notably sparse. My parents sat in the front row, their faces etched with the kind of devastation that comes from discovering that one child has systematically destroyed another's life while they watched unknowingly from the sidelines. Grace was there too, holding Tyler's hand with white knuckles, her engagement ring catching the fluorescent courtroom lighting in a way that seemed almost accusatory. Judge Margaret Foster entered the courtroom precisely at 9 o'clock, her black robes billowing slightly as she took her seat at the bench. Judge Foster had a reputation for fairness tempered by intolerance for anything that undermined the integrity of the legal profession, which made her an ideal choice for a case that involved multiple attorneys and medical professionals accused of coordinating elaborate fraud. "Good morning," Judge Foster began, her voice carrying easily through the courtroom's acoustics. "We are here today for preliminary proceedings in the matter of People of Connecticut v. Lucas Harrison, Dr. Margaret Hoffman, and Bradley Morrison. The defendants are charged with multiple felonies including identity theft, fraud, conspiracy, and unlawful administration of controlled substances." She looked down at the paperwork spread before her, then raised her eyes to survey the courtroom. "I understand that the victims in this case include Miss Emma Harrison, who is present today and will be providing testimony about the alleged crimes. I want to make it clear from the outset that this courtroom will maintain appropriate decorum regardless of the personal relationships involved." The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Sarah Reynolds, rose from her table with the kind of controlled energy that suggested she had been looking forward to this moment for weeks. Reynolds was known for her meticulous preparation and her ability to present complex cases in ways that made them accessible to juries, skills that would be essential for explaining the intricate web of deception that had defined my life for the past 3 years. "Your Honor, the people will demonstrate that Mr. Lucas Harrison, with the assistance of Dr. Hoffman and Mr. Morrison, orchestrated a systematic campaign to steal his sister's academic achievements, professional opportunities, and financial resources while simultaneously convincing her that she was mentally and intellectually incapable of managing her own affairs." Reynolds walked to a presentation screen that had been set up near the jury box, though today's hearing would be conducted without a jury. "The evidence will show that beginning in Miss Harrison's final year of law school, the defendants began intercepting her communications, declining opportunities on her behalf, and administering medications that impaired her memory and cognitive function. The first image that appeared on the screen was my law school transcript, showing grades that reflected academic excellence far beyond anything I remembered achieving. Reynolds used a
laser pointer to highlight specific courses and grades while explaining how my actual performance had been hidden from me through a combination of pharmaceutical manipulation and systematic gaslighting. Dr. Hoffman prescribed powerful anti-anxiety medications and sleeping aids that were delivered to Miss Harrison under the pretense that they were vitamins and supplements recommended for stress management, Reynolds continued. These medications, administered in doses that exceeded safe therapeutic levels, caused significant memory impairment and made it difficult for Miss Harrison to form clear recollections of her academic achievements. The next series of images showed the forged power of attorney documents that Bradley Morrison had helped create, papers that gave Lucas broad authority to act on my behalf in professional and financial matters. Reynolds explained how these documents had been used to decline job offers worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, redirect speaking fees and consulting payments, and accept awards and honors that were then used to advance Lucas's own political career. While Miss Harrison was being told that she had barely graduated law school and should be grateful for any employment opportunity, Mr. Lucas Harrison was representing himself in professional circles as her spokesperson and representative, building a network of political contacts based on her intellectual achievements and academic credentials. The courtroom was completely silent except for the soft hum of the ventilation system and the occasional rustle of papers. I watched Lucas's face as the scope of his deception was laid out in methodical detail, looking for signs of remorse or recognition of the harm he had caused. Instead, I saw calculation, the same careful assessment of angles and opportunities that had probably guided his decision to steal my life in the first place. Reynolds continued her presentation for nearly an hour, walking through bank records that showed diverted payments, correspondence that documented declined opportunities, and medical records that revealed the systematic administration of mind-altering substances. The evidence was overwhelming in its scope and devastating in its implications, painting a picture of betrayal that went far beyond typical family dysfunction into the realm of organized criminal conspiracy. When Reynolds finished her opening presentation, Judge Foster called for a recess to allow the defense attorneys time to prepare their responses. The courtroom emptied slowly, with Lucas and his legal team huddling in intense conversation while my family members filed past without making eye contact. Victoria and I walked to a small conference room down the hall where she spread out notes for my upcoming testimony. Emma, you're going to be asked some very difficult questions about your relationship with Lucas and your memory of events during law school. The defense is going to try to suggest that you're confused or mistaken about what happened, that your current clarity is somehow artificial or coached. I nodded, understanding that Lucas's attorneys would do everything possible to undermine my credibility and suggest that I was either lying about my experiences or misremembering them due to mental health issues. Victoria, what if they're right? What if my memories are unreliable? How can I be certain that what I think I know is actually true? Emma, we have documentary evidence that supports everything you've described. Your law school records, the intercepted communications, the medical evidence of pharmaceutical manipulation, all of it corroborates your account. Your memories may have been suppressed, but the facts speak for themselves. When court reconvened, I was called to the witness stand to provide testimony about my experiences. Walking across the courtroom under the gaze of my family, my brother, and the legal professionals who had helped destroy my life, felt like traversing a minefield where every step might trigger an explosion of painful revelation. The court clerk administered the oath with practiced efficiency, and I placed my hand on the Bible while promising to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was swearing to provide accurate testimony about events I had been prevented from remembering clearly. Reynolds began with basic questions about my background and education, establishing for the record who I was and what my relationship to the defendants had been. Then she moved into more specific territory, asking me to describe my memories of law school and the discrepancies between what I thought had happened and what the evidence now revealed. Miss Harrison, when you graduated from Sterling University Law School 18 months ago, what was your understanding of your academic performance? I believed I had graduated in the middle of my class after struggling with most of my coursework. I thought I was lucky to have passed the bar exam on my first attempt and fortunate that any law firm was willing to hire me. And what do you now understand about your actual academic performance? According to the documents we've discovered, I graduated valedictorian with the highest grade point average in the school's history. I received multiple academic awards, published articles in law journals, and was offered prestigious clerkships and job opportunities that I apparently declined without my knowledge. Reynolds guided me through a detailed account of my relationship with Lucas during law school, the medications I had been given under false pretenses, and the systematic undermining of my confidence and memory that had characterized the past 3 years of my life. Miss Harrison, during this period when you believed you were struggling academically, who was your primary source of support and guidance? My brother Lucas. He visited me regularly at school, helped me organize my schedule, reminded me about deadlines, and arranged for medical care when I was having difficulty concentrating and remembering things. Did you ever question Mr. Harrison's version of events or seek independent verification of your academic standing? No, Lucas was the person I trusted most in the world. When he told me that I was struggling or that my professors were concerned about my performance, I believed him completely. When he said that medications would help with my anxiety and concentration problems, I took them without question. The most difficult part of my testimony came when Reynolds asked me to describe the emotional impact of discovering the truth about my stolen achievements and suppressed memories. I found myself fighting back tears as I explained how it felt to learn that years of self-doubt and diminished expectations had been artificially imposed by someone who claimed to love me. Harrison, how has learning the truth about your academic achievements and professional opportunities affected your sense of yourself and your future? It's been devastating and liberating at the same time. Devastating to realize that someone I trusted completely was systematically destroying my life while convincing me it was for my own good. But liberating to understand that the limitations I thought I had, the intellectual inadequacies I believed defined me, were artificially created by someone else's manipulation. When Reynolds finished her direct examination, Lucas's lead attorney, a sharp-featured man named Robert Sterling, rose for cross-examination. Sterling had a reputation for aggressive tactics and an ability to make sympathetic witnesses appear unreliable or vindictive, skills he would undoubtedly deploy in an attempt to undermine my credibility. Miss Harrison, isn't it true that you've struggled with anxiety and depression for most of your adult life? I've experienced anxiety and depression, yes, but I now understand that much of it was caused by the medications Dr. Hoffman was prescribing and the systematic undermining of my confidence by my brother. But you can't be certain of that, can you? Mental health conditions are complex, and it's possible that your current interpretation of events is colored by your emotional state and your desire to blame others for your own struggles. I took a deep breath, drawing on reserves of strength I hadn't known I possessed. Mr. Sterling, I have documentary evidence that proves my academic achievements were real and that they were hidden from me. I have medical evidence that shows I was given powerful medications under false pretenses. I have financial records that demonstrate money earned through my work was redirected to my brother. This isn't about my emotional state or my desire to blame others. This is about facts that can be independently verified. Sterling continued his cross-examination for over an hour, probing for inconsistencies in my testimony and trying to suggest that my recovered memories were unreliable or artificially constructed. But Victoria had prepared me well, and the documentary evidence was too strong to be undermined by aggressive questioning. When Sterling finished, Reynolds called several additional witnesses to corroborate my testimony and provide expert analysis of the evidence. Dean Richardson from Sterling Law School testified about my actual academic record and the communications he had received from someone claiming to represent me. Dr. James Mitchell, a psychiatrist specializing in medication-induced memory impairment, explained how the drugs I had been given could cause the kind of cognitive suppression I had experienced. The most damaging testimony came from Marcus Rivera, the digital forensics expert Victoria had hired to analyze the forged documents and intercepted communications. Rivera demonstrated conclusively that the power of attorney papers were fraudulent, that emails declining opportunities on my behalf had been sent from accounts I had never accessed, and that Lucas had been systematically impersonating me in professional communications for over 2 years. As the day wore on, the case against Lucas and his co-conspirators became increasingly airtight. The evidence was overwhelming, the testimony was consistent, and the defendant's attempts to suggest alternative explanations for the facts became more desperate and less credible. Judge Foster called for a final recess before hearing closing arguments, and I stepped outside the courthouse for the first time since morning. The November air was crisp and clean, and the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps. Victoria joined me, her expression cautiously optimistic. "Emma, you did beautifully in there. Your testimony was clear, consistent, and compelling. I think Judge Foster is seeing the case exactly as we hoped she would." What happens next? Judge Foster will hear closing arguments, then she'll make her ruling on whether there's sufficient evidence to bind the defendants over for trial. Based on what we've presented today, I'm confident she'll find probable cause for all the charges. When court reconvened for closing arguments, Reynolds delivered a powerful summation that tied together all the evidence into a cohesive narrative of systematic fraud and betrayal. She reminded Judge Foster that the defendants had not only stolen money and opportunities from me but had attempted to steal my very identity, convincing me that I was incapable of achieving the success I had already earned. Your Honor, this case represents more than just fraud or identity theft. It represents an attempt to destroy a brilliant young woman's sense of herself and her place in the world. The defendants didn't just steal Emma Harrison's past achievements, they tried to steal her future by convincing her she was incapable of greatness. Sterling's closing argument focused on questions of intent and the complexity of family relationships, suggesting that Lucas had been trying to protect me from stress and pressure rather than deliberately harming me. But his arguments felt hollow in the face of the overwhelming evidence of calculated deception and financial gain. Judge Foster took less than 30 minutes to reach her decision. When she returned to the bench, her expression was stern and her voice carried the weight of judicial authority. Having reviewed the evidence presented today and considered the testimony of all witnesses, this court finds probable cause to believe that the defendants Lucas Harrison, Dr. Margaret Hoffman, and Bradley Morrison engaged in a coordinated conspiracy to defraud Emma Harrison of her academic achievements, professional opportunities, and financial resources. She looked directly at Lucas as she continued. The evidence suggests a level of premeditation and sophistication that goes far beyond typical family dysfunction or misguided attempts at protection. The defendants will be bound over for trial on all charges. The courtroom erupted in quiet murmurs as the implications of Judge Foster's ruling sank in. Lucas would face trial on multiple felony charges that could result in significant prison time. Dr. Hoffman and Bradley Morrison would also face criminal prosecution for their roles in the conspiracy. Most importantly for me, the legal system had officially recognized that I was the victim of elaborate fraud rather than someone who was confused about her own capabilities and history. As court officers led Lucas away to process his formal arrest, he turned to look at me one last time. I expected to see anger or defiance, but instead I saw something that looked almost like relief, as if the burden of maintaining his elaborate deception had finally become too heavy to carry. My parents approached me hesitantly as the courtroom cleared, their faces etched with shame and confusion. My mother's eyes were red from crying, and my father looked like he had aged years in a single day. "Emma," my mother said quietly, "we had no idea. We're so sorry we didn't see what was happening, that we didn't protect you from this." I looked at them. These people who had raised me and loved me but had also failed to notice when one of their children was systematically destroying another's life. "I know you didn't know," I said finally. "Lucas was very good at making everyone believe what he wanted them to believe." "What happens now?" my father asked. "To our family, I mean. How do we move forward from something like this?" It was a question I had been asking myself for weeks, and I still didn't have a complete answer. "I don't know, Dad. But I think moving forward has to start with everyone accepting the truth about what happened, even when it's painful or embarrassing." Grace appeared beside our parents, her face streaked with tears and mascara. "Emma, I'm so sorry. I had no idea Lucas was doing any of this. If I had known, I would have tried to stop him." I believed her, though I also understood that Grace's ignorance had been partially willful. Like our parents, she had found it easier to accept Lucas's version of events than to question why her brilliant older sister had suddenly become so diminished and struggling. Grace, you couldn't have stopped this. Lucas was very careful to make sure no one would question his version of events. But going forward, I need you to understand that I'm not the person you thought I was. I'm not struggling or limited or in need of protection. I'm someone who had her identity stolen and is now trying to reclaim it. Over the following months, the criminal case against Lucas and his co-conspirators proceeded through the court system with the inexorable momentum of justice finally served. Lucas eventually pleaded guilty to multiple felonies in exchange for a reduced sentence of 5 years in prison plus full restitution of the money he had stolen from me. Dr. Hoffman lost her medical license and received 3 years in prison for her role in the pharmaceutical manipulation. Bradley Morrison was disbarred and sentenced to 2 years for his assistance with the forged documents. More importantly for my future, the legal proceedings had created an official record of my actual achievements and capabilities. Dean Richardson worked with Sterling Law School to create amended transcripts that accurately reflected my academic performance, and Judge Williams offered me the Supreme Court clerkship that had been held open based on Lucas's fraudulent communications. The financial restitution from Lucas allowed me to pay off the student loans I never should have owed and to accept the prestigious clerkship position without worrying about immediate income. For the first time in years, I was able to make decisions about my future based on my actual capabilities rather than artificial limitations imposed by someone else's manipulation. The psychological recovery was more complex than the legal and financial restoration. Working with a therapist who specialized in trauma recovery, I slowly learned to trust my own perceptions and memories again. The medications that had kept me in a cognitive fog were completely eliminated from my system, and I experienced a clarity of thought that felt both familiar and revolutionary. Most challenging was rebuilding relationships with family members who had unknowingly participated in my diminishment. Grace and I eventually developed a new relationship based on mutual respect rather than her pity and my shame, but it took time and effort from both of us. My parents struggled more with accepting the new reality, occasionally slipping back into old patterns of treating me as fragile or limited. 6 months after Lucas's sentencing, I was invited to deliver the keynote address at Sterling Law School's graduation ceremony. Standing at that podium, looking out at a sea of young faces preparing to enter the legal profession, I spoke about the importance of intellectual honesty and the dangers of allowing others to define our limitations. The greatest theft, I told the graduates, is not the stealing of money or property but the stealing of someone's sense of their own potential. When we allow others to convince us that we are less capable, less intelligent, or less worthy than we actually are, we become accomplices in our own diminishment. The speech was well received and widely reported, marking my emergence as a public figure in my own right rather than as Lucas's supposedly limited sister. Judge Williams invited me to co-author an article on judicial reform that was published in the Harvard Law Review, and I began receiving speaking invitations from organizations interested in my perspectives on identity theft and psychological manipulation. A year after the courthouse proceedings, I accepted a position as a law professor at Connecticut Law School, where I would teach courses on constitutional law and victims' rights. The job offered the perfect combination of intellectual challenge and public service that I had always been drawn to, though I hadn't been allowed to recognize or pursue those interests during my years under Lucas's influence. The small apartment where I had lived during my diminished years was replaced by a house near the law school, a space that reflected my actual personality and interests rather than the reduced expectations I had been trained to accept. I filled it with books on constitutional law, art that inspired me, and furniture that was comfortable rather than merely adequate. Sometimes I wondered about the parallel universe where Lucas had never intervened in my life, where I had been allowed to experience my achievements and build my career without artificial obstacles. But mostly I focused on the future that was finally mine to shape, grateful for the clarity that had emerged from such a dark period of confusion and manipulation.
On quiet evenings, I would sit in my study reading legal journals and preparing lectures for my students, sometimes pausing to appreciate the simple pleasure of thinking clearly and trusting my own mind. The woman I had become was stronger than the woman I might have been, forged by adversity but not broken by it. Lucas wrote to me once from prison, a letter that managed to be both apologetic and self-serving, expressing regret for the harm he had caused while also trying to justify his actions as misguided protection. I read it once and then threw it away, understanding that some relationships cannot be repaired and that moving forward sometimes requires leaving the past behind completely. The experience had taught me that identity is more resilient than I had ever imagined, that even when systematically suppressed and undermined, our essential selves find ways to persist and eventually resurface. I had lost years of my life to Lucas's deception, but I had also gained a deeper understanding of my own strength and a determination to help others who might face similar challenges. Standing in front of my constitutional law class on a crisp autumn morning, teaching students about the principles of justice and individual rights that had ultimately saved me, I realized that my story had become more than just a personal victory. It was proof that truth has its own power, that justice can prevail even against sophisticated deception, and that no one has the right to steal another person's sense of their own potential. The woman they now called the governor in legal and political circles was not the person Lucas had tried to destroy, nor was she exactly the person I might have been without his interference. She was someone new, shaped by both achievement and adversity, strong enough to build a future worthy of the past she had reclaimed, and wise enough to help others avoid the traps that had temporarily ensnared her. And in the end, that was perhaps the greatest victory of all, not just reclaiming what had been stolen, but transforming the experience of theft into a source of strength and wisdom that could benefit others. Lucas had tried to steal my identity, but instead he had inadvertently helped me discover who I was truly meant to become. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.